Good morning. My name is Sharon Sobotta, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Have you ever noticed how unfair life can feel? How much injustice there is in the world? How many obstacles pop up in our path when we're working towards something? I have. My life for a while has felt like a series of unfair circumstances strung together. I'm going to tell you about a few examples this morning. In 2015, as I was adjusting to being a single mom of a 3-year-old and a brand new baby in the Bay Area without any family and state, my dad had one of his first heart attacks. It was then that I learned that his heart was inoperable, that his arteries were clogged to the point that the valves in his heart had created their own tiny streamways to get through. That summer, I packed up my girls and headed back to Wisconsin. We stayed with my parents, walked down the street to see my Aunt Pat, who was like a second mom to me, and sometimes took a short car ride to visit my sister in Stevens Point. Life got chaotic at times, really chaotic. My dad got mad at me when I begged him not to eat burgers and fries for the sake of his heart. My mom critiqued my messy room just like she did when I was a kid. We all had the family quarrels and tensions that we would have because we were adjusting to being in close proximity after living separately for so many years. But we were not alone anymore. There was family all around us and even friends that I'd left behind. It felt like my girls and I had finally found a safe place to land. When it got closer to the end of the summer and the end of my maternity leave, I found a dream job just outside of Minneapolis as the director of a diversity center. I imagined living in Minneapolis near my college friends in a diverse community that I loved and being just a 2-hour car ride away from my parents, rather than what I was, an hour-long BART ride, a 3-hour plane ride, and then a 2-hour shuttle ride. I applied for the job humbly, knowing that I'd work from the position of an ally as a straight white woman with working-class roots and biracial children. To make a long story short, out of 100 candidates, they offered me the job. My salary would be the same as it was here in the Bay, but my rent would be cut in half. I'd live in a house, not a modest apartment, and most importantly, I could see my family on weekends. By then, my ex had gotten some support for his own struggles, and I invited him to come along. It almost seemed like he was on board until he started listing his terms and conditions. Then I thought I was being accommodating, and I offered the day before I was going to hand in my resignation letter that he could come whenever he was ready. The next morning, a white woman with curly hair wearing PJs showed up at my home. Not with flowers, but with court papers. In that moment, life as I had known it came crashing down. The free-spirited woman who had once traveled the world on a shoestring budget was now confined to a 9-county radius when in the company of my children, until the matter was litigated in court. By the time that would happen, my dream job and everything that it represented, living in an affordable place within driving distance of my family, having my children grow up with their cousins and grandparents, would be long gone. My ex told me that I made him feel insignificant when I told him he could come when he was ready, that I could give up my job and prove to him that I was an honorable woman, and then we would go as a unit when or if he felt that was right. If not, he told me, I could count on being here in the Bay alone, away from those that were dearest to me, my parents, my aging relatives, until they were no longer here on Earth. To oversimplify for the sake of getting to some resolution in this story, I will tell you that things didn't work out for us. Many of the things that he threatened have, in fact, come true. My dad died before the sun rose on his 74th birthday, on January 18th, 2018, on the heels of a Christmas that we didn't get to spend together. My Aunt Pat died last summer, a week after we visited her to bid her farewell after she lost her battle to pancreatic cancer. My mom is now 80 and on her own without a husband or sister, with one of her daughters a few hours away by car, and the other one, me, on the other side of the country. Christmas, which is also the birthday of my oldest daughter, was split in half by a judge. That meant that my children would never have the chance to wake up on Christmas morning with their maternal grandma or enjoy Christmas Eve with any of those relatives because of the timeshare and the fact that we're on opposite sides of the country. All of this broke me for a while and led me to spontaneous tears as I contemplated all that I didn't have and all that I had lost. I have this thing that used to be my mantra, which is that when life doesn't go as planned, we should embrace it at first and then do something about it. Well, the mantra had served me well when coping with other life obstacles like breakups, and it helped me as a writer. It felt very cliche this time around. I did go back to school for an MFA program, thinking I could work on another dream of mine. But it was super hard, not just because of all the critiques you invite of your writing and by extension your life when you write nonfiction, but because of navigating this while being a single parent. In my professional life as a reporter, I was covering stories about social and racial injustice in the world, and as an advocate, I was teaching people about gender equity, while barely scraping by financially and emotionally myself. My therapist kept reminding me of 3 themes that she said would set me free in time. She said that while hope is okay to have, it was important not to have expectations of others. She reminded me not to personalize and not to assume, not to make assumptions. Today, my external circumstances have not changed that much, but I can tell you that I have. My own mantra that was to embrace life when it didn't go as planned, and then to do something about it didn't work. First, because I couldn't embrace it, and second, because I couldn't do the thing about it that I wanted to do. I had to revise my mantra. My new version is that when life doesn't go as planned, work to accept it, and then determine your next steps. It might be a step toward making peace with an unforeseen circumstance, redefining freedom, finding silver lining, or resolving to cherish small victories, even in the midst of struggle or what feels like unfairness and injustice. Like the story that we heard earlier in Between Us and Abuela, the children couldn't see their grandma in person, but that didn't stop them from connecting with their grandma. They stood in front of a wall, not so different from the one that the Trump administration began building between Mexico and the United States. And though they couldn't connect in person, they connected with their voices, with their energy, and with their creativity. I'm not here to suggest that the individual difficulties we experience in our lives compete with or even should be compared to the struggles of immigrants or repressive or divisive policies in our country. I'm merely drawing a parallel of connection. In my case, I had to detach from my idea that Christmases needed to be spent with my extended family and instead make it a tradition to visit post-Christmas in time to bring in the new year together. I am far away from my mom, sister, and nieces, and all of my relatives, and I see them once, and if I'm lucky, twice in a year. But I can tell you that we make those times count. In the meantime, we talk on the phone every day and exchange care packages with our favorite coffees and stories. My dad is no longer here, but every time we see a blue jay, we believe he's visiting us. My biological family is far away, but I piece another one together. I say this in the present tense because it's an ongoing process that's also impacted by what seems like unfairness and injustice, as one of our closest family friends, who happen to be Mexican citizens, may soon need to relocate to Canada as they're ineligible for visas and healthcare in the United States. The future is uncertain, but we've vowed to make the best of the present. On my recent flight back with my girls, when they were fighting between who would get the window seat and telling each other how unfair it was that one would get the window seat and one would get the middle, I resolved to recheck their tickets and found that the universe was working with us. SB, as it turned out, had her own window seat near a kind woman named Mary. Delilah got another seat in another window aisle, and I sat between her and a man named Isogawa-san. It worked. It even turned out that Mr. Isogawa split his time between Minnesota and the same prefecture just outside of Tokyo that I once lived in. As we exchanged stories and uncovered more and more common ground, the phrase that kept coming up was, "Sekai ga hontou ni semai desu yo ne?" The world is really a small place, isn't it? You see, if I had gotten what I wanted, I wouldn't get the chance to connect with kind strangers like Mr. Isogawa on a plane ride back to Minneapolis, because I would have already been there. I might not have had the chance to develop deep friendships with family and community here. I might not have had the chance to develop deep bonds with friends and community here while piecing together my own makeshift family. I wouldn't have the chance to spend 16 consecutive days with family or to redefine holidays like Christmas. And I also wouldn't have had the chance to join this community or to be here with you. All of this reminds me that even though I may be on my own with my children, I'm never alone. Somewhere behind each constraint or each restriction is some silver lining. I share this personal story of seemingly unfair circumstances juxtaposed with the story of children in Mitali Perkins' book, Between Us and Abuela, who find a way to work around the injustice that separates families, not to give us hope that injustice of the world or the unfairness in our lives will dissipate, because I promise you, it won't. I shared instead to invite us to ponder together what we're going to do anyways. How are we going to work around the unfairness and the injustice of life and the world around us? I share it to remind us all that even when we're on our own, we're not alone. To close, I'll share something that Angela Davis, a political activist and freedom abolitionist that many of you know, maybe all of you do, shared with me when I interviewed her more than a decade ago. She said, when I asked her what is the most important lesson that she learned on her life journey so far, she said this: "What I have learned is that we rarely actually win the victories we think we're going to win. But in the process of engaging campaigns and struggles and social justice, we do end up changing the world, we do end up changing the terrain, and we do end up changing our lives. The most important lesson I have learned over the years, as someone who's been involved now for over a half century in this work, is that freedom is constantly in the process of being rethought and redefined." End quote. On that note, even in the unfairness and the injustice of life, may we go forth and continue chipping away at change so that we may be the best versions of ourselves and our communities, and that we may make our community and our world a little better, knowing that even when we're on our own, we are never truly alone because we have each other.